Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. And so it begins. We have people holding these doctors, these hospitals accountable for what they have done to children, pushing gender ideology onto children to the point where they have been led down a path of permanently altering their bodies. A few years down the line, these kids turn around and realize what has been done to them, realize that they have been lied to. So we have a 22-year-old woman who identified as a boy in her teen years who has won $2 million, a landmark decision after a lawsuit against New York doctors who she accused of pushing a double mastectomy on her when she was still a minor. Fox Varian had the life-altering surgery when she was just 16 years old, getting approval from a psychologist and a surgeon, both of whom a jury found liable of medical malpractice on January 30, the Epic Times reports. So Varian, who considers herself a detransitioner, was awarded $1.6 million for past and future pain and suffering, and an additional $400,000 for future medical expenses. Because unfortunately, when they go down this path, they are set up to become lifelong patients. And then if they decide to detransition, that comes with a whole host of new medical procedures that they may need or medications that they may need to take. Ultimately, it involves trying to restore back to you what you have lost. And as we know, that's not always possible, which makes this all the more tragic. That kids are being led down this path and being told that this is going to help them feel better. Being told that denying who you are biologically is the answer to their problems. So psychologist Kenneth Einhorn and surgeon Simon Chin were held responsible in Worcestershire County Supreme Court in White Plains for ignoring standards of care and procedural guardrails by pressuring the minor into addressing gender dysphoria with permanent surgery, the jury decided. Lawyers for Varian pointed the finger at Einhorn, saying he drove the train and was putting the idea in Fox's head that she needed to change her gender with surgery, according to the report. These are cosmetic procedures.
For a lot of people, it starts as social contagion. This is being promoted by the media and by Hollywood and by corporations and by academia and online. It's everywhere on social media. So it's easy for a child who's distressed or uncomfortable with themselves or their bodies or struggling with something mentally to come to the idea that it's because they were born in the wrong body. And as soon as this child or their parents says anything even close to that in a professional medical setting, the so-called experts come with medical promises and magical cures for this mental distress that's being described. And as we know, there is no surgery that can be performed that fixes mental distress. We've, in fact, already done this to women in the form of hysterectomies, calling them crazy and telling them that removing their uteruses will make them feel better. Well, now we do it with young women and little girls' breasts and other body parts. It's gruesome.
It doesn't address the psychological issues, the trauma that they may have faced, the confusion. It doesn't address or cure anything, really. It just adds to their problems in a way that is unimaginable. And bear in mind that a lot of these kids also have other issues, such as autism, depression, anxiety. That is not necessarily because of gender dysphoria, but they take all of the issues they have and use it to justify these kids going down a path where their bodies are permanently altered, where they're chemically castrated even. It's beyond sick. And the last people who should be pushing this are those who have taken an oath. And I know people are thinking, what about the parents? Yes, parents do consent to medications and certain procedures for their child, because we know that children cannot consent. But when it comes to procedures that permanently alter their bodies for cosmetic reasons, that really should be left up to the child when they are old enough to make that decision, when they are old enough to consent, at least on paper. Because I still think 18 is far too young, but that's just me. Your brain isn't even fully developed But remember, these parents are told, they bring in their daughter, they're told that, oh, you can have a son or a dead child. These parents are put under immense pressure too. Even Elon Musk, where his son was transitioned at a very young age, where his son was put on puberty blockers. Varian's mother said that she was against the surgery, but she eventually ended up consenting to it because she was told that exact same thing, that her daughter would be at risk of wanting to take her life, that her daughter's life was at risk. They're still calling these surgeries life-saving, and a doctor who has all of that authority, who has all of those qualifications, a psychologist who has all of those qualifications too, will use their power and authority to pressure these parents. They will weaponize their qualifications, weaponize their years of experience to add weight to the bogus claim that somebody can change their sex. They will use their expertise and their standing in the medical field to pressure parents. And Varian's mother, Claire Deacon, is saying that this is what happened to her. She said, this man was just so emphatic and pushing that I felt like there was no good decision. I think it was a scare tactic. I don't believe it was malice. I think he believed what he was saying. But he was very, very wrong. And we know these doctors are sold out to gender ideology. They're essentially in a cult. And then they use their qualifications to recruit others. In my opinion, that's what was going on here. Yeah, maybe he did believe it, which makes it even more sick. That somebody with all these qualifications, somebody so smart, can be drawn into this ideology and push it onto others. The fact is, there are far less invasive procedures and treatments that is available to these children, and there's no reason to push them down this path. Yes, they can receive counselling. Yes, they can have somebody just listen to their concerns rather than telling them what to do. Yes, they can have their other issues treated and addressed. So Varian was told that pretending to be a boy was going to be the solution to her issues. But after the double mastectomy, she said she was in a lot of pain. It left her physically ill and deeply unhappy. The jury was not asked to rule on the ethics of gender-related surgical procedures for minors, but instead whether the medical professionals took appropriate steps before suggesting the threshold crossing measure. Why is the first thing they think of is to go to such an extreme? And then they call things like counselling conversion therapy. The nerve of these people being left in a situation where you've had healthy body parts cut off. How is that supposed to impact their mental health? There were studies showing that regret is actually one of the biggest reasons for them having those thoughts of wanting to take their lives. Regret. Not to mention all the physical side effects of being on certain drugs and having had certain procedures done. We know that it can affect bone density. They're dealing with pain as a result of these procedures. They're more prone to fractures, feeling like their bodies are falling apart because they've been given something that isn't natural to their bodies. And that does have long-term consequences. The consequences that they're still trying to find and decipher, that even many of these doctors are still unaware of. One long, terrible experiment that no child should be a part of. The fact that they're thinking of putting 200 kids in the UK on puberty blockers is deeply disturbing. It shouldn't even be an option, especially in light of the Cass report, knowing that there's no proof that any of this works. What a terrible thing to gamble on, the health and well-being of a child. So the lawyers for Einhorn and Chin argued that Varian lived allegedly happily as a male for several years after the 2019 surgery before filing the lawsuit in 2023. So they're saying that it worked, that this girl was perfectly happy living as a man, whatever that means, perfectly happy with her double mastectomy and all the side effects that come with that. And they're saying that Varian identified as a man, used male pronouns, and referred to herself as a trans male, and that she first presented the idea for chest surgery. Yeah, but she was a child. She was 16. The adults in the room should have known better. The adults in the room really should have told her that she's a woman and she can't be a man. How about these doctors start telling kids the truth? You can dress however you want to dress. You can present yourself however you choose to present yourself, but you cannot change your sex. It's very simple. How about doctors get back to basic biology? You would think they would know all about that. And Trump did say that his administration were going to make it easier for these kids to seek compensation from these reckless doctors, from these reckless so-called medical professionals. He was going to make it easier to hold these medical professionals accountable once and for all. And Trump obviously began implementing restrictions of gender-based medical interventions for minors with gender dysphoria. So there are now 28 lawsuits going on across the country at the moment at various stages of the legal proceedings. But what is sad is that no amount of money can replace what they have lost. No amount of money can bring back the healthy body parts that they had cut off. No amount of money can reverse the effects of puberty blockers. When somebody is now, 18, 19, 20, and have been on puberty blockers all that time, it can't be reversed, contrary to what these doctors say.
So Europe's gone the way of, across Europe, to again go back to treating gender dysphoria in young people with psychotherapy and with psychiatry. But to people who say, oh, well, hormone treatment in minors, it's reversible. That what you went through, oh, it's reversible. Speak to that.
The hormone treatments I was given and those that have been given to my peers and people younger than me, they're not reversible. When activists and doctors are talking about reversible side effects, they're talking about detransitioners returning back to the system that harmed us and paying out of pocket this time for things like laser hair removal. But there's absolutely no way to restore things like your voice going back to normal. Testosterone causes an overgrowth of the larynx inside the throat, and the female throat isn't designed to grow that way, so the voice will never be the same, for example. And of course, anything surgical that happens is absolutely irreversible. But of course, we've heard doctors who work in the gender abusing community say that girls can just go and buy breasts if they want them back.
Oh my
but
God.
You can't breastfeed with that.
And that is very, very tragic indeed. But it's a start. At least there is some accountability now. And these doctors need to know that they can't continue to do this. And I think this is the most interesting part of this case. The jury was not asked to rule on the ethics of gender-related surgical procedures. That wasn't even their main consideration. What they were considering was whether the medical professionals took appropriate steps before suggesting the threshold crossing measure. If the agenda wasn't to push this onto people, they would look at alternatives before suggesting such drastic measures, cutting off healthy body parts and making these people lifelong patients with all sorts of drugs and medications. But they're not going to be able to get away with it. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.